Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. It's an honor and a pleasure to have Jim Moore from Minneapolis, I believe, and David Oliveira from Cambodia with us today. I have the deepest respect for these two poets. Before I introduce Jim, I want to tell him the poet, scholar friend Bill Moore says hello to you, Jim.
Oh, great.
Watching the show, he was the first person in the early 70s to tell me about you and your poetry. Jim Moore's most recent book of poetry is called Prognosis and was published by Grey Wolf in November 2021. In a review in the New York Times, Daisy Fried wrote of Prognosis, quote, "Moore is preoccupied with old age, loneliness, mortality, and also with the American body politic's own failure. These are poems of arresting lyric reportage, whimsical, tragic, a touch fantastical," end of quote. He lives in Minneapolis and in Spoleto, Italy, with his wife, the photographer Joanne Verberg. His poems have appeared recently in the Paris Review, the New Yorker, and the Nation. He has often taught poetry at the Colorado College and in the MFA program at Hamline University. Here's a brilliant poet, Jim Moore.
Thank you, Harry. Hi, David. And how lovely to hear from Bill Moore, how much he's done for poetry for decades now. And I so appreciate it, everything that he's done. So I'm going to dedicate my part of this reading to Holly Prado, who is a poet whose work I loved and whose spirit, in my mind, embodied the spirit of poetry. I'm going to read these poems from my new book, Harry mentioned, Prognosis. The first poem I'm going to read was written shortly after the murder of Dante Wright in Minneapolis. And it's the first poem in the book, but it was the last poem I wrote for the book. Look Again, for Chance Erlin and Marie Howe. It was just luck. Orange groves, those two olive trees, the way we sat side by side on the picnic bench, you in that white blouse open at the throat, those goats in the pen with the two dogs who looked outnumbered, but happy in their confusion. A gun mistaken for a taser, a murder, you know the rest. None of it is just luck. Too early for the swallows, but right on time for the red-winged blackbirds. Look away, then look back. I can almost see it, the world as it really is, but not quite. This next poem is called Whatever Else. It was written before the pandemic. A lot of the poems in this book were written during the pandemic and in response to the pandemic. This one was written before, but somehow I think it connects. Whatever else. Whatever else, the little smile on the face of the woman listening to a music the rest of us can't hear. And a sky at dawn with a moon all its own. Whatever else, the construction crane high above us, waiting to be told how to do our bidding. We who bid and bid and bid. Whatever else, the way cook number one looks with such longing at cook number two. Let's not be too sad about how sad we are. I know about the disappearance of the river dolphins, the sea turtles with tumors. I know about the way the dead don't return no matter how long they take to die in the back of the police car. I know about the 1,000 ways our world betrays itself. Whatever else, my friend, spreading wide his arms, looks out at the river and says, after all, what choice did I have? After all, I saw the man walking who'd had the stroke, saw the woman whose body won't stop shaking. I saw the frog in the tall grass, boldly telling us what truly matters. I saw the world proclaim itself an unlit vesper candle, while a crow flew up into the tip of it, sleek black match burning. I guess one of the things I think about this book, Harry, as I was listening to you introduce me, is that little excerpt from the review of the book. It makes it sound a little on the grim side. I don't feel like it's a grim book. It is a book that deals with old age and with all the stuff that's going on in the world today. But I think there's also joy in the book, and I hope this poem points in the direction of that. Also known as, if you are closer to being old than you would like to be, and slowness begins to redefine the idea of difficulty into something you would much rather take a pass on, then it is time for the sky to grow larger than the earth, than the sea even. You need to go to that place where your story is seriously quiet. Nothing in it counts compared to the things sky calls out to: birds, clouds, the occasional cypress that has reached beyond itself. You could call it a kind of waiting, and that would be fair. There is a green bench in the sky, a corner of heaven, you could say. And there you can sit in the shade and watch the grandfather and grandson walk by. The little one makes the older one laugh again and again, and that is the way it works in heaven. Also known as going home. Also known as getting over yourself. This poem's called The Last Day at 75, Summer Solstice, 2018. I did finally arrive. What a surprise, not to sing the song of creation, but to be sung by it. The pine tree smelling faintly of pine trees, shadows in all the right places, loneliness and oleander vying for my attention. Purple weeds in the long grass, the smell of the linden trees, crows and seagulls, all their dire warnings. Meanwhile, the light goes on and on. One of the things I really missed during this endless pandemic is going into coffee shops. And I always have done a lot of writing in coffee shops. And because of my age and various underlying conditions, I'm not joining the great multitude of people now returning with open arms to the world. I'm trying to be more out in the world than I have been, but I haven't been hanging out in coffee shops. Ode to my kind. Here I am, once again, among my kind. Half moon high outside the window, rowing its light down the empty street, parting the dark waves of the parking lot, soaking the oak leaves all the way through. Coffee shop at Broadway and Central, no booth, perched on a stool and counting on making it through the night. Everyone plenty younger than me, yes, but still my kind. Hunched over and frowning at computers, at phones, at paper with words crossed out. Everyone busy making marks or marking time. We like to laugh, heads thrown back. And sometimes we bury those heads in our arms and cry. We like to exclaim birds when birds there are. And ditto moon, as if never before anyone had seen such a thing. October 2018, miserable year, swirling all around us, swindling us out of joy. And yet there are these birds calling out, birds and half moon, to guide me through the darkness in a country that reels and staggers like a drunk father who has run over his own child in the driveway and wants somehow to cover it up, to bury the child behind the house. Maybe no one will ever know how bad it is, but we know, my kind. And we sit holding coffee, or maybe even holding someone's hand, maybe writing about how the sorrow never seems to end. Only 1 hour until closing time. 60 minutes left to try to figure out how to bear the unbearable, knowing we are so close to the end. Then tomorrow, damned if we don't show up all over again, because that's what we do, heads bent to the task at hand. Birds, mooing, ruin. So at the beginning of each section of this book, I have a very short, and if you can really make it out here exactly, but very short poems sort of in the shape of columns, flush right. And they all begin with the word and, and, as if I'm in the middle of something. And they're kind of fragments in a way, I guess. And the light in trees, which Virginia Woolf called a buried treasure. For example, Juanita in her wheelchair being pushed for the last time by George down Main in the sunlight, face tilted up, eyes closed, calling out, "Get me the fucking marijuana." I spend a lot of time in Italy. My wife's a photographer, and she works there, and I am happy to go along for the ride. And one of the things that's happened is that I've become really attached to a number of the Renaissance painters, Italian painters, the way they seem to embody in their portraits and in their paintings and frescoes a kind of emotion. I don't even know the name for it, a combination of emotions that involves tenderness and a kind of strength and both openness and I don't know, sorrow, happiness, all in once. So one of those painters is Fra Angelico. And this is about one of his frescoes, Grace. In Cosimo de Medici's cell, there is a fresco where everyone is waiting in line to kneel at the feet of the newly born God. At the end of the line, one bearded man rests his cheek against the muzzle of his horse, waiting patiently to see God, the baby, lying there on the ground, ready to be loved. Perhaps holding him will feel like holding the hand of my friend in the hospital who no longer speaks, except for 3 words, yes, God, and tree, as she strokes my wrist unceasingly. This next one is one of the poems that does have to do with the pandemic, and it's called The Pandemic Halo. Where I spent my initial couple of years of the pandemic was in a blue chair looking out the window of my study, and it happens to look out on a neighborhood, just a regular neighborhood, people walking their dogs, and there's a clinic down below where we live, and doctors and nurses, and then there are construction workers coming to work. And so I came to know their routines quite well as I sat there day after day, month after month. The pandemic halo. The pandemic halo began to appear a few weeks into it. Oddly, the first time, it was surrounding the head of an old lad. He was being walked, as usual, at 7 a.m. by his young owner. Lots of lamppost stops. There it was, faint at first, then hovering at a tilt above the silky head. I thought maybe it was a weird trick of light. The day was bright, but the next morning it was still there. That same day, the nurse, who wears a pink cape and parks in the lot across from me, almost always empty now, was trotting along on her way to the clinic that is just below my window. She had it too. I don't think she noticed it at all. She was walking quickly, a little late to work. So I think that was what was on her mind, not holiness. The third day, a young man in a red cap with a backpack slouched past. I'd never seen him before. You could see he was seriously depressed, looking down at the sidewalk. But it was there, firmly in place. It was above him, of course. He couldn't see how beautiful he really was. And that woman with the nasty little dog, same thing. By now, the pandemic halo is well recorded. Everyone knows about it. We almost take it for granted, what had once seemed amazing. Somehow it is related to breath. When we die, it goes away. After the pandemic is over, they say the halo effect will disappear. They say we will return to life as normal. We won't need it. I have my doubts. I think we might need it more than ever. I think we might be saying things like, remember how amazing it was during the pandemic? How everyone had a halo? How grief and holiness were all we knew of the world? And the sight of a dog at a lamppost could bring us to tears. Not to know how to live. All modesty is false modesty when it comes to poems or to the silence in which poems begin before they are words, when they are still daisies at the foot of a dead god in an anonymous painting, 13th century. Not to know how to live is one thing and nothing to be ashamed of. But not to know how to sit in front of those daisies with tears in my eyes, what a waste that would be. Fear and love. I wish I could make the argument that a river and a sunset, plus a calm disregard of the ego, are enough. But whatever comes next must include tents in the parking lot, that homeless camp on the way to the airport, and the hole in your cheek from the cancer removed yesterday. I said last night, in a few seconds before I fell asleep, you do realize, don't you, everything is falling apart. You said, okay, I'll try to keep that in mind. And now it is starting to be late again, just like every other night for the last 75 years. Fear and love, a friend said in an impromptu speech at his surprise birthday party. We all live caught between fear and love. He tried to smile as he spoke and then sat down. Yesterday, you saw the moon from the operating table where they were about to cut you. Look, you demanded. And the surgeon bent and turned to see it from your angle, knife in hand. It's funny how, it's not exactly funny, but it's interesting how during this period of the pandemic, phrases we used to use in other kinds of contexts have suddenly taken on a new sort of weight and substance, underlying conditions being one of those phrases, by the light of two underlying conditions. It helps if you are 77 to feel shorn, as an animal might feel shorn, unburdened of its too muchness. It helps if you carry with you, like two candles to light the way, two underlying conditions by which to see day passing into darkness. And it helps to listen to Beethoven's late sonatas. We are merely the keys, a music beyond our understanding, plays us as it will. That screened-in porch, not far from the ocean. It is a summer night. and I am the small boy in the hammock, swaying back and forth, barely awake. One of my grown-ups carries me inside after I have fallen asleep. In the morning, it helps to wake to the sound of the waves, not quite knowing where I am or why I'm there. To what now do I truly belong? Shall I call them suffering and joy, my two underlying conditions? Poem that leaves behind the ocean. 1. I've always wanted to write a poem that ends at the ocean. How the poem gets there doesn't much matter, just so at last it arrives. The manatee will be there. We saw all those years ago, almost motionless under the water, like a pendant swaying at an invisible throat. The one my mother used to wear on the most special of occasions. My God is still there, the one I prayed to as a boy. He never answered, but that didn't keep me from calling out to him. 2. I turn off the notification app for good, no longer needing to know exactly how many gone. After all, clinging to life is what we have always done best. We are still trying to hide from the truth of things, and who can blame us? Lists don't make sense anymore unless toilet paper and peanut butter head them. Last stage patients are not being told how crowded the ferry will be that will take them across the river. 3. We are forbidden cafes, churches, even cemeteries. Fishing by ourselves, however, is still permitted, as long as we keep nothing at all. As long as we walk back home in darkness, empty-handed, breathing deeply, having thrown back what was never ours to keep. I'd like to say this as clearly as possible. I live in a world in which 5 a.m. moonlight shines down on an empty parking lot. We live in a world in which rain falls on the bridge at noon, in which loneliness is never lonely for company. As clearly as possible, I'd like to say my soul is as plain as a fallen leaf on a sidewalk, as useless and as beautiful. I'd like to finish with a poem called Home. Thought a lot about home and what home means in recent years. I didn't used to think about it when I was younger, but for some reason, I think about it more now. And Harry, thanks again for having me come today. Home. I came home to the rain, to the ladder in the rain, propped against a steel pipe and leading nowhere. I came home to your cough, to a seagull buried alive in fog, crying out. I came home to the crying out. And under the earth, a train shook and groaned, carrying people through the darkness. I came home to being carried through the darkness. Each moment was the last moment, each breath my last breath. I knew my place, and my place was resting my head against the ladder leading nowhere. I came home to the statue of the Buddha and said, as if I had a right, I want that calm. How to help but want it. Came home to Fra Angelico's half-naked man at the foot of the cross. How careful he is as he lowers inch by inch the dead Christ into our earth. All those years ago, on her way out the door, mother holding up her hand for me to fasten tight that shiny bracelet. I came home to a feather tied to the willow by the river as the little darkness of a dove flew by. I saw that. And then saw those 3 deer drinking from the river, looking up suddenly, remembering they were wild. Remembering now the last smile I ever saw on my mother's face. Rest quietly and wait, my child. You will be called.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jim, for that authentic, comforting reading. And the one word I would use to describe it is you as a sense of humility. And it was nice that you ended at home, but I like it, the way you have a human perspective on things. These days, we get hit with so much mass info and numbers and breaking news, et cetera. And, within your poetry, which is very clear, and just some of the phrases you used, a corner of heaven, how to bear the unbearable. And in the poem about the pandemic, somehow it's related to breath. When it goes away, we die. All those simple human things. And then also within all that, you have, when you were talking about the paintings in Italy that you admired, you talked about the emotionality, the tenderness, strength, openness, joy, sorrow, and those are within your poetry too.
Oh, thank you, Gary.
So you just, one person talking to another person, which I always like in poetry. And we have 2 minutes left before our next guest. What would you say to a young poet when she is sitting there beginning to write a poem? What would you tell her to focus on? Would it be an image? Would it be an emotion? Would it be words? What would you say?
Well, I think it's probably different for everybody. I can say what it is, what it was for me as a young poet and still is today. I find that if I can begin, as I'm sitting down to write, if I can begin by noticing some small detail in the present moment. Could be anything. It could be like the nurse I saw walking across the street to go to the office. It could be something even smaller than that. It could be the wind in the trees. And that's like a little permission giving for me. Once I can really see that and be moved, this is really kind of amazing. Look at the wind in the tree. That will get me going. And then the poem may not stay in the present, but it begins with some kind of homage to just life as it is right now. But I think the 2 things I would say to her beyond that, this putative young poet, is be stubborn and be humble. I think if you're in it for the long run, those 2 qualities are really helpful.
I like that, and it's an honor for us to have you on our program.
Thank you, Harry.
You have such great sense of longevity, and I just see broadcasts coming across. I'm not sure, Jennifer.
I got tired of my face. Time to move on.
There we are.
No. This has been happening occasionally. I'm so sorry, but we're back just like that.
Just like that.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you very much, Jim Moore. Our next guest is David Oliveira. David Oliveira was born in California's San Joaquin Valley. He was a longtime resident of Santa Barbara, California, where he was publisher and editor of Mille Graze Press. He was a founding editor of Solo, a national journal of poetry, and founded the long-running Santa Barbara Poetry Series. In 2000, he was named Santa Barbara's Millennium Poet Laureate. Oliveira has published widely, including 2 poetry collections, a little travel story, and As Everyone Goes, with a 3rd forthcoming in 2022, Still Life with Coffee. His poems are featured in several important anthologies, including How Much Earth, The Fresno Poets, which he co-edited, California Poetry from the Gold Rush to the Present, and the Gavia Brown Book of Portuguese American Poetry. He lives and writes on the banks of the Mekong River near Phnom Penh. Here's a magnificent poet, David Oliveira.
Thank you very much, Harry. I'm very honored that you asked me to read in your program. I've been a somewhat avid follower of this program. And I want to thank you for pairing me with Jim, because I have also been reading him for some time, and his poems were very emotional, I think, for me this morning. I want to start with a poem by William Matthews. He's one of my favorite poets. He died some time ago now. He wrote this poem in a book called Time and Money, which is my favorite of his books. I think it's just a brilliant work. And this one has has a little bit of Italy in it. He wrote it on a fellowship to Italy. I don't know exactly where he was, but he was in the Umbria region, which is where Spoleto is, north of the region north of Rome. And he uses a little bit of Italian in there. My Italian, you will forgive me in advance. He says, one of the things he says, he's talking to a cat, and he says, enough, go away. And he also reads a headline in a newspaper, which translates as a crisis in the Gulf. He's referring to the first Gulf War in the early 90s. We have to number all of these wars now, to keep track. I think it has some relevance to what's happening today. It's called Home Away from Home. Sparse mail came, no phone rang, much work got done. A scrim of haze hung over Umbria. A scrim of ignorance hung over me. What paltry Italian I could speak came from menus, wine lists, and libretti. I knew a few imprecations. I could fend the neighbor's gaunt cat from the doorway because it sprayed the bedspread the one time it slipped in, and fend it in the mother tongue. Basta, va, gattino, perfido. Well then, I could harangue small animals in a new language. I sat in the sun-stained piazza at noon and dandled my second cappuccino, a happy man. Crisi nel Gulfo braid the papers. Stern men lofted planes and scowled at maps. This brandish will be war before it's over, I said to myself in the same sage tone of voice I hated as a boy. Men over drinks or in barbershops talked like that. Who knew how the world works, they'd have you know. And now I'm fluent in their dialect. And I'm right about the war, as they were always right. And I'm as smug and helpless as they were. I thank you for William Matthews. I presume there was raucous and enthusiastic applause for that poem. I'm going to read mostly new things, relatively new things in the last 2 years, because like all of you, I've had a lot of time on my hands where I needed to fill it, and writing seemed to do that very well. I'm going to start with an old poem, however. I dedicated it to Philip Levine, who was my teacher, was and is still my teacher. It's called At This Hour. They crouch in the shadow, 1-4, 1-3, 1-2. Their families lie around them with so many good reasons to stay dead. A small gray bird no one recognizes flies to the windowsill, inciting more dust to fall back on the shattered glass. The song is pleasant, though brief, as the bird is not compelled to stay. Outside the house, a corporal, whose name is not recorded in the report, notices a flower growing amid brick and cement rubble from the wall. The bird and flower suggest irony, but it hasn't been morning for a long time, and no one has patience for philosophy at this hour. A woman walking by, more tired than old, resembling a question, pauses to rest. She looks up. The sky is careless of birds. She sees something, perhaps an angel, perhaps not. And in that one moment, understands suffering. No further away than the length of a rifle, the others remain unaware of her sudden clarity. And the woman never speaks of it, as this changes nothing. History waits in line for a kilo of rice, and she must go there. The soldier takes a picture of the flower. He recognizes the miracle. I like to read an old poem of mine from time to time because it reminds me, how good I used to be. This one is, it's called How Art Explains Us, and it's a series of 6 vignettes that don't seem too related to each other, but that's how it came out. And they're not numbered, so you'll know when I move to the next one by a slight pause. Actually, the change of subject would be a better indicator. I feel like myself today, not as remarkable to say as presumptuous to think. I know how it feels to be me every day. The up here me, the down there me, the artist me, the lazy to the bones me, or one of countless other me's. But many days call on feelings for which I don't have a name. Feelings that sweep through the body whatever way they want without asking for permission or assist from any me. Miss Porter, my sophomore English teacher in high school, told me I didn't really understand something until I could explain it. Her words haunted me for years because even then, flashes of inspiration entered my head whose meaning came sure and clear, while I lacked the competence to wrest this understanding into the sway of language. My favorite painting has been Van Gogh's Starry Night. I love it still, though its favor lessens with cliché. So many things I love being loved by so many. My first afternoon in New York, I went to see it at MoMA, hanging among some dozen other works, no special sign pointing to its breathtaking presence. I didn't want to leave and stood transfixed outside time. Approaching a half century later, I'm still there. In World War II, my father recorded a song on a one-off vinyl vanity that wore down a bit each time it played until his voice hardly whispered. Years after Dad died, my brother Robert found a way to pull out the hazy traces and put them on a tape, which he then gifted to us siblings. We listened and cried. I never heard my mother sing. I have her voice. I love to sing all day long, under my breath, in a car, radio blazing, gloriously naked and loud in the shower, dancing through the empty theater of my house. Art lives in partnership between artist and audience, even when they're the same person. Art comes to us incomplete, only finished when experienced. This defines its essence. Art tells us nothing, but reminds us of things already known. The power, not in insight, but recognition. Joy and satisfaction radiate from works of art when completed, yet true ecstasy comes in their creation. It is said that Levi drowned one night, drunk, falling from his boat as he reached to touch the moon's enchanted floating reflection. Is this true? Of course, but are you asking, did it happen? Artists live in constant confusion of the thing for its image. Take the mirror, for instance. Is that you? This poem is old memory. It's called It Is Sunday. It is Sunday. It is evening, early. But not this Sunday, not today. This is the Sunday I am born, and not a minute too soon. It's an hour or so after sunset and 8 hours or so since Dad drives Mom here from the farm. Here is Sacred Heart Hospital, run by Dominican nuns in long white habits who glide legless from room to room. To be more precise, it's 8:30, according to the time Dr. DeCampus tells someone to put down for the record. But this seems too pat to be true. And in the moment, I'm too busy complaining to log the notation myself. Soon the room fills with a train of callers. I assume they come bearing gifts, but the presents are pilfered before I can inspect for quality. I suspect the nuns. The visitors utter gasps of adoration. That's how I interpret the noise. They look as though I am the first baby they see. And indeed, I am exceptional. That's clear even as I lie fixated by ceiling lights. It is Sunday. It is evening, early. This Sunday, today. The hospital where I am born is gone, another in its place. Still, I still lie fixated by ceiling lights, but now these are fixed in the sky. This evening, like most evenings, my mind struggles to separate the lights one from the other, one fact from thousands of guesses, not where any exceptional person expects to be after a long life. But here I am, and here we are. For now, I must include you, who on the day of my birth, see in my eyes the one star I can call down to light our way out of ignorance. Over time, you turn away to embrace others with their fancy clothes and fancy speech and fancy facts. We all know the world is water and stone, all of it moving out of our control. We all know we make our own way over the world. And though there's a lot of guidance, it points in different directions. That I made it this far is proof a person can make it this far, walking any direction with a light that shines only on uncertainty. Sure, go ahead, turn to the others, learn from them what you can. Many have more facts than me, but no one has more answers. This poem is called Cabo da Roca, which is a place, Cape of Roca in Portugal. And it's further explained in the poem. And I begin with epigraph by Luís de Camões, who is the the poet of Portugal, the Shakespeare of Portugal, you might say. Onde a terra se acaba e o mar começa. I know Portuguese as well as I know Spanish, and Italian, but it means where the land ends and the sea begins. The handsome young guide apologized for the strong wind, but unnecessarily, as I never felt he shouldered the blame. Still, it arrived unexpectedly for the season, the sea salt peppering my cheeks like so many bugs against the windshield. I suppose every place can stand as the end of the world, but this place has a marker and a story and a poem. The monument proclaims in Portuguese, westernmost point of continental Europe, which pretty much figured as the world's end before the age of sail, in pride's honeyed tongue. The rough-hewn granite rises sharply from the water to the top of the promontory, nearly 150 meters above the sea. Promontorium Magnum, the Romans named it more than 2,000 years ago, on their way to lay claim to everything. Who knows what the Portuguese called it in whatever language we used then? I stand alone, if you count no person standing beside me as alone, to look at the waves, their colors, the wonder at their expanse. I can easily imagine this going on forever. The view from here revels in undeniable spectacle. Rays of light filter through a smatter of distant clouds onto rolls of water, and their silvery sparkle dances across 1,000 shades of blue. We expect this where water encounters land and sky, and though persons may not have stood here, or even someplace with an ocean and shore, we all carry the memory of sea within us, longing for the break of water and the taste of salt. I'll take you to the ends of the earth. The words rolled out sweetly and sincerely, though ultimately impotent, for the ends of the earth lay within reach, and I failed to take you to them. Not my only failing, nor the only one for which I've needed forgiveness, but the next in a long trail of missteps, a word I choose instead of sins, as that implies willfulness, or mistakes that implies I knew better and fucked up. And what of your intentions? You pulled me to places you wanted to go, to which I went gladly or reluctantly, sometimes exhausted of argument. After all, we made a partnership, querido. We pulled each other this way and that, painstakingly learning the measured steps to take us to the finish of our dance, where the land ends and the sea begins. This poem is called News from the Home Country. This morning, like most these days, I wake up trying to remember what my dreams talked about last night. Never the first awake to get the world spinning and not far from the last to give a damn. Neither I nor dreams have patience for each other. I turn to the internet to catch morning's news, even before turning to a cup of coffee. Without a doubt, a lousy way to start the day, and I rebuke myself for still holding out hope that the forces of good have triumphed overnight. The world becoming the one I've wanted to see, something not believable even within dreams. The world I want to see has never existed without any expectation it ever could. I want to see a world empty of suffering. News from the home country today tells about light, how the autumn light fills the trees and the trees start their slow turns through all the hues of unleaving. Knowing that this season has come again allows a certain calm to descend over the year's rage. The fall light brings a period of reflection, a time to question why Earth seems so hard to love, despite its grandeur, its bounty, its charity. I feel empty walking out in the softened light. Earth does all Earth can do, so what is wrong with me? The news chronicles the names of people I know who died faster than me. I hold on to Vic's name. It seems childish now to have wished he outlived me, too arrogant to see I was asking too much, that what the world wanted to give was too little. This poem is called Xenolith. Xenolith is a rock that's formed inside another rock. So the two rocks are of different substances, but they're locked together. I don't want to fall in love again. I don't say this as a small joke, though at my age, such assertions seem laughably preposterous. But when does love not seem preposterous? I say this because I've known love, felt it as sweet pain held against my body, which still feels and holds the abiding bruises. Now I only want a scattering of infatuations, little intimacies to flesh out an hour or few, and serve up inevitable divorces with oh so sweet brevity. All this, all within reach, given the ethos where I live, given that I live. Tonight I lay out the Rubaiyat's simple recipe: a bow, a book, bread, wine, and thou. Well, not you, love, not love. Somehow the world turns without you while I wait my turn to step off. The world doesn't give up its secrets, and I've given up hoping for enlightenment. I lie in bed and look up from a body living on pills as much as anything, to the ceiling, the walls, the windows, the doors, the decorations, a used shirt draped over the back of a chair, and have no idea what I see. I'm going to end with this poem called On the Cusp of Reason. All, if not well, stands familiar. Nemiroff called it the weight of life. And without reading his poem or examining the rhetorical threads, everyone knows what he means. The tons pressed against the heart that render each step almost impossible, like the anxieties keeping me pinned fast in bed, lying, trying to lift my body and force the short walk to the door, where I can stand on the other side to let the healing elixir of pure water, the first rain of the season, wash over my eyes and mouth until I shake off the drops of despondency onto the mud and spreading puddles that grow into new obstacles through which I must wade my way into the future. This does not draw despair, but the world, and not the whole of the world at that. You have seen sunrises and sunsets of indescribable beauty. Indescribable because these moments happen so fast, the mind hasn't time to retrieve the buried words amassed for such occasions, let alone your failure to teach these words to lovers and friends who could remind you, or the children who carry news across time. The sky weaves spectacles out of light and dark, but enlightenment gets lost in the gloaming. Your hunger for this wisdom goes unsatisfied as only questions emerge in the shadows. and you likely do not recognize this great gift, which releases you from the burden for answers. For all the words which fill our languages, for all the ways those words find order, for all the millennia passing, reason and understanding still elude us, and the weight of obligation remains only to tell each other what we see. So
Thank you
I
very much, David.
thank you very much.
That was such an honest, joyful, poignant reading, full of love and full of humility also, and also, sense of remembrance. And you have such a devotion to the art of poetry, and not only to the poetry itself, but to your fellow poets. I've noticed that over the years, and that's touched me deeply. And I see Jennifer there. I know she's always has some good insights. Jennifer, what would you like to say?
I'm, again, thrilled. This hour of poetry every week breathes new life and hope into me. The pandemic has been hard, and to hear your reflections on it, I hope that we don't lose that halo, And David, you had a line about a woman who was a question mark, and it immediately took me back to a friendship that I had with a woman who was shaped like a question mark. And I actually wrote to the crew and said, we're going to need to play a trailer. I can't go right into the next show. I need a moment to process. Thank you both.
Thank you, Jennifer. And we have 2 minutes left, and I ask people who come on here the first time, when did you write your first poem, David?
Well, I was in grammar school, nothing I saved or would care to read again. I wrote in college, and I studied poetry in college, but I didn't continue writing after. I continued going to readings. I loved going to poetry readings and filling myself with those words. But college kind of taught me that I couldn't write well. So I sort of stopped. And then after almost 20 years, I started to write again and had a flood of words.
I'm glad you began to write again. And this has just been a marvelous reading from both of you. Jennifer said something about a year ago. She said when COVID hit, we thought it would be the end of creativity. But in fact, the creativity has expanded. And here we are, a man living in the middle of the United States and a man living, far away from us in Cambodia. And we're all here together. And it's just been a joy. So thank you, Jim. And thank you, David. It's been a lovely, deeply touching reading. And now I will turn this back to our director, Jennifer Clymer.
Again, thank you. Before you go away, I know that you already know what's up for next week, Harry. So give us a little teaser, and maybe Jim and David will be waiting in the wings watching, like some of your wonderful guests that are watching today.
The next poetry reading will be from the collected poems of Wallace Stevens, including Sunday Morning, including The Emperor of Ice Cream, and the Auroras of Autumn with Jim Cushing, Phoebe McAdams, Bob Beecher, our CEO, Corinne Conley, and Helen Richmond, residents, actors who are just marvelous. All the people are marvelous readers. So I always look forward to these type of readings. So thank you very much once again to all of you and to Jennifer.